He is the most documented, the most studied, the most reviled figure of the 20th century, a name that has become synonymous with absolute evil, Adolf Hitler. We know the broad strokes of history, the rise to power, the fanatical speeches, the catastrophic war, the unspeakable horror of the Holocaust. We know the monster. But what about the man? For decades, his image was a carefully constructed facade, a product of relentless propaganda designed to project an image of unwavering, superhuman control. But behind that facade lay a profoundly disturbed, bizarre, and contradictory individual. A man ruled not just by ideology, but by deep-seated phobias, strange obsessions, and shocking personal secrets. In this video, we pull back the curtain. This is not an attempt to humanize a monster, but to understand the terrifyingly human flaws that lurked beneath the surface, to see the cracks in the icon. These are 21 shocking things you never knew about Adolf Hitler. Please hit that subscribe button to support us as we grow. Also, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. Number 21. The frustrated artist. The rejection that shaped a fanatic. Our story begins not in a beer hall or a political rally, but in an art studio. Long before he dreamed of conquering Europe, a young Adolf Hitler dreamed of becoming a painter. He saw himself not as a soldier or a politician, but as an artist, a creator. In 1907, at the age of 18, he arrived in Vienna, a city pulsating with culture and art, and applied to the prestigious Academy of Fine Arts. He was confident, even arrogant about his talent. The rejection was a seismic shock to his fragile ego. The Academy's evaluation was brutal in its simplicity, unfitted for painting. His drawings, they said, contained too few heads, too many sterile architectural studies. They lacked life, soul, humanity. A year later, he tried again. This time, he was not even permitted to take the exam. The rejection was absolute. This failure was the first great fracture in his psyche. He was left homeless, drifting through Vienna's flop houses and soup kitchens, selling clumsy watercolor postcards of the city's landmarks to Jewish art dealers just to survive. It was in this cauldron of poverty and humiliation that his artistic frustration curdled into a poisonous worldview. He began to blame his failure, not on his own lack of talent, but on the cosmopolitan, Judaized establishment of Vienna that he felt had rejected him. The artist's dream died, and in its place grew a vengeful political fanaticism. The man who would later burn books and degenerate art had first been spurned by the very world he sought to join. Number 20. The vegetarian tyrant. A diet of contradictions. One of the most enduring and paradoxical images of Hitler is that of the vegetarian dictator. He publicly eschewed meat, spoke passionately against the slaughter of animals, and even planned to enact nationwide vegetarian laws after the war. He would horrify his dinner guests with graphic descriptions of slaughterhouses to put them off their meat. His personal chef, a man who had to navigate his leader's exacting dietary demands, was tasked with creating elaborate, visually appealing meals from only vegetables, grains, and fruits. This was promoted by Nazi propaganda as evidence of his purity, his self-discipline, his connection to a natural Germanic way of life. But the reality, like so much about Hitler, was a web of contradiction and deception. While he largely avoided solid meat, his diet was far from strictly plant-based. His personal physician, the dubious Dr. Theodor Morell, regularly injected him with crude concoctions derived from animal organs, including liver extracts and pulverized heart. His soups and broths were often secretly prepared with meat stock to add flavor and nutrients. His fear of cancer, the disease that killed his mother, and his chronic digestive problems, crippling flatulence and stomach cramps, were likely the true drivers of his dietary choices, not some lofty ethical principle. So here we have the central contradiction: a man who professed a deep love for animals and a disgust for their suffering, yet who could, without a flicker of remorse, sign orders that would lead to the industrialized suffering and extermination of millions of human beings. His concern for living creatures was meticulously selective, extending to his dog, but ending at the borders of his own Aryan ideal. Number 19. The mother's son, the only woman he ever loved. To understand the emotional void within Hitler, one must look to the one person he ever genuinely loved, his mother Clara. By all accounts, their bond was intensely close. He was her favorite, her Adi, and he reciprocated with a devotion he would never show another human being. This relationship was forged in tragedy. When Clara was diagnosed with breast cancer, the teenage Adolf became her primary caretaker. He doted on her, tending to her during the painful, brutal treatments administered by their family doctor, a Jewish physician named Eduard Bloch. Hitler would later speak of this period with uncharacteristic tenderness, watching over his mother as she wasted away. Her death in December 1907 shattered him. Dr. Bloch later recalled that he had never seen a young man so overcome with grief. Hitler stood for hours sketching her as she lay on her deathbed. His world utterly collapsed. This loss created a permanent emotional template. He had loved, and he had lost catastrophically. Psychologists have speculated that this trauma made him incapable of forming genuine intimate attachments thereafter, freezing his emotional development. All his subsequent relationships with women were distant, controlling, and ultimately tragic. The man who wept at his mother's bedside became the man who coldly orchestrated the separation of millions of mothers from their children on the ramps of Auschwitz. He could venerate the abstract ideal of German motherhood while simultaneously destroying the most fundamental human bond on an unimaginable scale. The warmth he reserved for Clara was replaced by an icy, impersonal cruelty towards the rest of humanity. Number 18. The absolute teetotaler. A body temple of hypocrisy. If his vegetarianism was questionable, his teetotaling was not. Adolf Hitler did not drink alcohol. He did not smoke. He publicly condemned both vices as poisons that weakened the German Volk, both physically and morally. At his Alpine retreat, the Berghof, smoking was absolutely forbidden. A rule that even the powerful Luftwaffe chief Hermann G. Fehring, a notorious morphine addict, had to reluctantly obey, often stepping outside onto the terrace for a furtive cigarette. Hitler would lecture his inner circle on the virtues of a clean lifestyle, sipping on herbal teas or sweetened fruit juices while they drank wine. He launched some of the world's first government anti-smoking campaigns, restricting tobacco advertising and raising taxes. This was all part of the cultivated image of the ascetic leader, a man of pure will who had mastered his own base desires in service of a higher cause. He presented his body as a temple, unsullied by foreign corruptions. The hypocrisy, of course, was staggering. While he abstained from alcohol and tobacco, he was, especially in the later war years, hopelessly dependent on a terrifying cocktail of prescription drugs administered by Dr. Morell. This included stimulants like amphetamines to fuel his all, night monologues, barbiturates to crash afterwards, and various quack injections of hormones and animal gland extracts. So, the man who presented himself as a paragon of natural health was, in reality, a chronic hypochondriac and a pharmaceutical junkie, his pure body temple running on a lab-made cocktail of uppers and downers. His war on vice was a public performance, masking a profound personal dependency. Number 17. The calculated orator. The mirror-made demagogue. The image we all have of Hitler is of the frenzied, seemingly spontaneous orator, whipping the masses into a state of ecstatic frenzy. The screaming, gesticulating demagogue appeared to be a man possessed by his own passion. Nothing could be further from the truth. The performance was just that, a performance meticulously crafted and endlessly rehearsed. In the early 1920s, Hitler would lock himself in a room for hours on end, standing before a full-length mirror, practicing every single gesture, every facial tic, every pause and crescendo in his speech. He worked with his personal photographer, Heinrich Hoffmann, who would take hundreds of photos of these rehearsals. Hitler would then study the photographs obsessively, analyzing his own image like a director studying rushes. "This gesture is too weak," he would say. "This expression is not convincing. Never do that again." He was crafting a character. He understood the power of symbolism and stagecraft long before he ever took the stage at a Nuremberg rally. The frantic energy, the jutting jaw, the sweeping hand movements, all of it was choreographed. He even practiced the iconic straight, armed Nazi salute for hours to achieve the perfect angle of defiance. He studied the recordings of his own voice, working to lower its timbre and sharpen its cadence for maximum radio impact. The spontaneous fanatic was, in fact, a consummate and coldly calculating actor. The rage was real, but its expression was a carefully honed weapon. He didn't lead the masses with authentic passion. He manipulated them with a brilliantly executed counterfeit. Number 16. The distant architect of death. The man who never saw a camp. Perhaps one of the most chilling aspects of Hitler's psychology was his ability to compartmentalize genocide. He was the undisputed architect of the Holocaust, the man who gave the orders and set the final solution in motion. And yet, Adolf Hitler never once set foot in a concentration or extermination camp. He never witnessed a mass shooting. He never saw the inside of a gas chamber. He never smelled the smoke from the crematoria. While his henchmen like Himmler and Hfis toured the camps and oversaw the machinery of death, Hitler managed the Holocaust from a sanitized distance. He received his information through sterile bureaucratic reports, numbers, statistics, logistical updates. He spoke in clinical, euphemistic language about evacuations, special treatment, and the Jewish question. This distance was crucial. It allowed him to disassociate the abstract, ideological concept of eliminating a race from the horrifying, human reality of the process. He was not a sadist who reveled in bloodshed. He was a fanatic who believed the end justified any means, so long as he didn't have to personally witness those means. He could sign the order condemning millions to death, and then sit down to a quiet vegetarian dinner and a screening of a Hollywood film. This ability to divorce supreme executive action from its human consequence is a terrifying psychological phenomenon. The Holocaust was for him an administrative problem to be solved, not a human tragedy to be witnessed. Number 15. The medical secret. The rumor and the reality. For decades, a persistent rumor has swirled around Hitler, one even immortalized in a crude British wartime song that he had only one testicle. Was this just Allied propaganda, a way to mock and emasculate the enemy, or was there truth to it? The answer lies in a long-lost medical report. In 1923, after the failed beer hall putsch, Hitler was imprisoned in Landsberg Castle. A prison doctor, a man named Josef Brinsteiner, conducted a routine medical examination. His report, which only came to light decades later, noted that the prisoner suffered from right-sided cryptorchidism, a medical condition where one testicle fails to descend. This document provides a medical basis for the long-whispered rumor. There is no evidence for the more dramatic story that he lost it to a wound in World War I. This seemingly trivial medical detail is significant not for mockery, but for what it reveals about the man's profound insecurities. Hitler was notoriously hypochondriacal and deeply ashamed of his own body. He would never be examined naked by a doctor again, instead describing his symptoms from behind a desk. This physical defect, in a man who preached a gospel of Aryan physical perfection, likely contributed to his intense body shame and his obsession with projecting an image of masculine, uncompromising strength. It was a vulnerability he spent his entire life trying to conceal and overcompensate for. Number 14. The Nocturnal Commander. The night owl of the bunker. The rhythm of the Third Reich was set by its leader's bizarre sleep schedule. Adolf Hitler was a creature of the night. His day would typically begin around noon. He would hold military conferences in the afternoon, but his real working day began after dinner. He would then hold court for hours, often until 3 or 4 in the morning, delivering endless monologues to a captive audience of aides, secretaries, and generals who were struggling to stay awake. He would watch movies, indulge in sugary cakes, and talk, and talk. This nocturnal existence was enabled and exacerbated by the dangerous cocktail of stimulants and sedatives administered by Dr. Morell. This schedule had a devastating impact on the German war machine. Critical decisions were being made by a sleep, deprived, drug-addled man in the middle of the night. His generals, exhausted and unable to think clearly, were in no position to argue with his increasingly delusional strategic ideas. The nerve center of the Axis powers was essentially running on the skewed biological clock of a single, deeply unwell insomniac. The darkness outside the bunker mirrored the growing darkness within. Number 13. The shaking hand. Parkinson's and the decline of a tyrant. As the war turned against Germany, a new physical reality began to betray the image of the infallible leader. His left hand developed a distinct, uncontrollable tremor. He began to shuffle when he walked, dragging his foot. His posture became stooped. His personal physician, Dr. Morell, treated him with ever more outlandish concoctions, but the decline was unmistakable. Modern neurological analysis, based on film footage and witness descriptions, points to a clear diagnosis. Adolf Hitler almost certainly suffered from idiopathic Parkinson's disease. This wasn't just a physical ailment, it had profound effects on his mental state. Parkinson's is often accompanied by cognitive and psychiatric symptoms, rigidity of thought, increased paranoia, depression, and dementia. As his body began to fail him, so too did his grip on reality. The man making increasingly delusional military commands in the Führer bunker in 1945, ordering non-existent armies to attack, refusing to acknowledge facts on the ground, was not just a stubborn ideologue, he was a very sick man. His neurological decline likely accelerated the catastrophic final act of the war, locking him into a rigid pathological mindset from which there was no escape. The trembling hand became the perfect metaphor for a regime shaking itself to pieces. Number 12. The water phobia. A childhood trauma. The all-powerful Führer, who commanded armies and terrified Europe, was ruled by a network of intense, irrational phobias. One of the most persistent was his fear of water. He disliked being on boats, refused to learn to swim, and would never be photographed in a bathing suit. The origin of this fear appears to trace back to a childhood incident in the town of Passau. Playing near the fast, flowing river Inn, the 4-year-old Adolf fell through the ice and was pulled under the freezing current. He was moments from drowning when a quick-thinking older boy, the son of his family's landlord, leaped into the water and dragged him to safety. This brush with death left a permanent psychic scar. For the rest of his life, he avoided water. It was an element he could not control, and it represented a primal vulnerability. This phobia extended to his architectural plans. He famously rejected designs for a vast swimming pool at the Berghof. The man who sought to dominate the world was, in a very real sense, terrified of it. Number 11. The poison paranoia. The food tasters of the wolf's lair. Paranoia was a defining feature of Hitler's character, and it reached its peak around the thing most personal to him, his food. Convinced that his enemies, be they the British, the resistance, or even his own inner circle, were plotting to poison him, he instituted a macabre ritual. At his wolf's lair headquarters in East Prussia, a group of 15 young women were employed for a single terrifying purpose. They were his food tasters. Women like Margot W. Fake were forced to sample every single dish prepared for Hitler, then wait for up to an hour to see if they suffered any ill effects. Only if they remained healthy would the food be sent to the Führer's table. These women lived in a state of constant fear, knowing that at any meal they could be consuming a lethal dose meant for someone else. It was the ultimate act of selfishness, using the lives of others as a human shield for his own. The vegetarian who couldn't bear the thought of an animal suffering had no qualms about risking the lives of 15 people at every single meal. His fear of assassination trumped every other consideration, revealing a profound cowardice at the heart of the supposedly fearless leader. Number 10. The speed addict. The Nazi regime on drugs. While Hitler publicly railed against vice, Nazi Germany was, ironically, a nation running on speed. The The German pharmaceutical company Temla had developed a powerful methamphetamine tablet called Pervitin. It was marketed to the public as a wonder drug for overcoming fatigue, and the German military quickly saw its potential. The blitzkrieg that swept through France in 1940 was literally fueled by speed. Millions of Pervitin tablets were issued to tank crews and infantrymen to keep them awake and fighting for days on end. But the biggest consumer of drugs was at the very top. As we've seen, Hitler's personal physician, Dr. Morell, kept his patient functioning with a constant stream of injections. While the exact formulas are lost, historical analysis suggests they contained everything from glucose and vitamins to steroids, amphetamines like Pervitin, and even oxycodone. The Führer's legendary energy, his frantic all-night monologues, and his sudden violent rages were not just products of his personality. They were, in part, chemically induced. The man who demanded purity from his people was a polypharmaceutical addict, his judgment and moods swinging wildly based on the contents of Dr. Morell's needle. Number 9. The Führer without a license. The man who never drove. Adolf Hitler orchestrated the creation of the Autobahn, the world's first superhighway system, and championed the development of the people's car, the Volkswagen Beetle. He understood the automobile as a symbol of modern German power and mobility. And yet, Adolf Hitler never learned to drive. He never obtained a driver's license. He was always a passenger, chauffeured around in a fleet of massive Mercedes, Benz limousines, often standing up in the front seat to wave to the crowds. His personal driver, Erich Kempka, was a key member of his staff. This paradox is revealing. Hitler was a man of grand, abstract visions, not practical details. He could conceive of a nationwide network of roads, but had no interest in the mechanics of actually operating a vehicle on one. It also fit his cultivated image. The leader was too important, his mind too occupied with the fate of nations, to be bothered with something as mundane as driving. He was to be conveyed, to be displayed, to be seen. The practical act of controlling the machine himself was beneath him. He preferred to control the driver instead. Number 8. The aversion to touch. A life without contact. Adolf Hitler was pathologically averse to physical contact. He almost never shook hands. He recoiled from hugs or pats on the back. Even within his inner circle, any form of touch was strictly avoided. In photographs, he is almost always seen holding his own hands or clutching his cap, ensuring they were never empty and vulnerable to contact. This aversion extended to his relationship with Eva Braun. In public, they were never seen to touch, kiss, or even hold hands. Their relationship was kept a state secret for years. This physical isolation was a powerful metaphor for his psychological state. He was a man utterly walled off from the rest of humanity, unable or unwilling to engage in the most basic human interactions that build empathy and connection. He could speak to millions over the radio, but he could not bear the touch of a single individual. It was as if he existed in a sterile, invisible bubble, separated from the very people he claimed to embody. This lack of human touch speaks volumes about a profound disconnect, an inability to relate to others on a fundamental human level. Number 7. The intellectual thief. The books that fueled his hate. Hitler was not an intellectual, but he was a voracious, if highly selective, reader. His personal library contained over 16,000 volumes. After the war, a portion of these books were captured by American soldiers and are now housed in the rare book division of the Library of Congress. Studying them provides a terrifying window into the mind of the tyrant. His collection was not one of great literature or philosophy. It was an arsenal of hate. It included serious, looking but pseudo-scientific tracts on racial hygiene, anti-Semitic pamphlets, and books on Germanic mysticism. He was particularly influenced by the racist theories of Houston Stewart Chamberlain and the geopolitical ideas of Karl Haushofer. But his reading was not about understanding, it was about confirmation. He would read only to find passages that supported his own pre-existing prejudices, underlining them aggressively and scribbling furious notes in the margins. He didn't engage with ideas. He mined them for ammunition. He even read Henry Ford's anti-Semitic tract, The International Jew, and kept a copy in his library. His was the scholarship of the fanatic, building a flimsy intellectual scaffolding to justify a deep and violent irrationality. Number 6. The tyranny of silence. A world without noise. At his various headquarters, but especially at his beloved Berghof residence, Hitler enforced a tyrannical rule of silence. He had an extreme, pathological aversion to unexpected noise. The staff was trained to move through the halls like ghosts, wearing soft-soled shoes to avoid any sound. Doors had to be opened and closed, without a whisper of a click. Conversations were to be held in hushed tones. Meals were often conducted in near, total silence, with Hitler himself frequently lost in thought. The sound of a dropped spoon or a cough could trigger a furious outburst. This obsession with auditory control reveals a man whose nerves were perpetually frayed, a man who could command the roar of armies and crowds, but could not tolerate the simple, unpredictable sounds of daily life. It was the environment of a sanatorium, a place for a deeply unwell man to retreat from a world he found unbearably stimulating and chaotic. The silence he demanded was not peace. It was the silence of a vacuum, empty of the messy, unpredictable humanity he sought to control, but could never understand. Number 5. The forged passport. The British joke at his expense. In the shadowy world of World War II espionage, the British Special Operations Executive was a master of psychological warfare. Their most audacious and darkly humorous operation was the creation of a perfect, meticulous forgery, a passport for Adolf Hitler. The passport itself was a masterpiece of counterfeiting, complete with official stamps and a photograph, but the devil was in the details. In the field for distinguishing features, the forgers had inscribed a large red letter, J, the stamp the Nazi regime forced upon the passports of all German Jews. Furthermore, the passport contained a visa, officially granting Adolf Hitler permission to emigrate permanently to Palestine. The message was a brilliant piece of ironic humiliation. The man who sought to exterminate world Jewry was now, according to this document, officially identified as a Jew himself with a legal right to settle in the ancestral Jewish homeland. It was a psychological bullet, fired directly at the FADRA's most profound insecurity. While there is no evidence the passport was ever used in a practical operation, its existence was a testament to the Allies' ingenuity and their understanding that undermining a tyrant sometimes requires not just bombs, but a perfectly crafted joke at his expense. Number 4. The Eagle's Nest. A birthday present, built on blood. Perched atop the Kelstein mountain in the Bavarian Alps, at an altitude of over 6,000 feet, sits the Kelstein House, better known as the Eagle's Nest. It was a birthday present for Hitler's 50th birthday, orchestrated by his obsequious deputy, Martin Bormann. The construction was a breathtaking feat of engineering, and a testament to the regime's brutality and extravagance. A road had to be blasted and carved into the sheer mountainside. A lavish lodge was built at the summit, accessed by a gleaming brass elevator shaft bored straight up through the heart of the mountain. The project was rushed to completion at an astronomical cost, both in money and human life. At least a dozen workers died during the dangerous construction. Hitler, ironically, rarely used it. He was uneasy with the heights, disliked the precarious road, and feared the elevator, worrying the British might try to bomb it while he was inside. The Eagle's Nest stands today as a stark monument to the absurdity of the Nazi court, a lavish, remote palace built on a foundation of blood and fear for a dictator too paranoid to even enjoy it. Number 3. The Final Bunker. The underground kingdom of delusion. As the Soviet army closed in on Berlin in 1945, Hitler's world shrank to a cramped, claustrophobic, and suffocating complex of rooms deep beneath the Reich Chancellery Garden, the Führer bunker. This was the physical manifestation of his crumbling mind. Here, in this concrete tomb, surrounded by the constant thrum of generators and the distant rumble of Russian artillery, the dictator's detachment from reality became absolute. He would pore over maps of armies that no longer existed, issuing orders to phantom divisions. He placed his faith in astrological charts and desperately waited for his supposed historical hero, Frederick the Great, to provide a miraculous turnaround. The man who had once commanded continents was now reduced to ruling a few hallways, his authority extending only to those few fanatics and doomed officials who remained with him. The bunker was more than a shelter. It was a psychological state. It represented his complete withdrawal from the world of facts into a self-created world of fantasy, blame, and apocalyptic thinking. The descent underground mirrored his final descent into madness. Number 2. Affection for children, propaganda, myth, and reality. Hitler's relationship with children was complex and largely performative, serving his political image rather than reflecting genuine affection. Hitler cultivated a public image as someone who cared about children, which was strategically important for Nazi propaganda. He was frequently photographed with children at public events, and the regime promoted the idea that he was building a better future for German youth. However, historical evidence suggests this was primarily political theater. Close associates noted that his interactions with children were typically brief, formal, and staged for cameras. He generally avoided spontaneous contact with children and maintained his characteristic emotional distance. While the Nazi regime created extensive youth organizations, these were fundamentally about indoctrination and control rather than genuine care for children's well-being. The Hitler Youth systematically militarized German children and prepared them for war. Most significantly, Hitler's policies directly harmed children on a massive scale. Hundreds of thousands of children were murdered in the Holocaust. The regime's euthanasia programs targeted disabled children. His war policies led to the deaths of countless children across Europe. Children were used as soldiers in the war's final stages. His actions demonstrate a willingness to sacrifice children's lives and well-being for his ideological objectives. Number 1. The ultimate contradiction, the coward's death. And so we come to the final, and perhaps most shocking contradiction. Adolf Hitler, who had sent millions of young men to their deaths with the cold command to fight to the last bullet, who had preached a gospel of fanatical, heroic sacrifice for the fatherland, did not die a hero's death. Facing capture and the undeniable justice of the advancing Red Army, he did not lead a final charge. He did not take up a rifle. On April 30, 1945, in the stifling silence of his bunker, Adolf Hitler and his new wife, Eva Braun, committed suicide. He died by a gunshot to the head, she by cyanide poison. In his final act, he ensured his body would never be put on display by his enemies, ordering his aides to douse his remains in gasoline and burn them in the Chancellery Garden. It was a death marked by nothing but utter cowardice and selfishness. The man who demanded ultimate sacrifice from everyone else chose the easiest way out for himself, leaving his people to face the terrible reckoning he had created. In the end, the myth of the fearless, resolute Führer evaporated, revealing the truth. A broken, terrified man alone in a hole in the ground, unable to face the consequences of his own catastrophic actions. These 21 creepy truths unravel the myth of Adolf Hitler, exposing a man of fears, obsessions, and contradictions. From his failed art dreams to his hidden tunnels, the Nazi machine buried these details to preserve his image. Yet these personal quirks pale against the horrors he inflicted. History demands we confront these truths, not to humanize him, but to understand the mind behind the atrocities. What shocked you most? Share in the comments, like, and subscribe for more untold stories.